The mining facility on Kepler 442b stretched across the rocky landscape like a metal cancer, its towers and processing plants belching toxic smoke into the alien atmosphere. Inside the cramped quarters of Block 7, Marcus Chen pressed his back against the cold metal wall and listened to the familiar sounds of suffering that echoed through the corridors. Footsteps. Heavy ones. Getting closer. Marcus had been counting the seconds since the last patrol passed. 43 minutes. The Zelkari were nothing if not punctual in their cruelty. He knew he had maybe 2 minutes before the next guard rounded the corner, and those 2 minutes might be his only chance to execute the plan he'd been forming for the past 6 months. The plan that would either free him or get him killed. 6 years ago, Marcus had been a mining engineer on Earth, designing extraction systems for deep-sea operations. He'd volunteered for the colony mission to Kepler 442b, drawn by promises of adventure and the chance to help humanity establish its first foothold among the stars. What he'd found instead was a trap. The Zelkari had been waiting. They'd allowed the human ships to land, had even welcomed the colonists with what seemed like genuine friendship. The aliens were tall and elegant, with pale blue skin and large, dark eyes that seemed to hold ancient wisdom. They spoke of cooperation, of sharing the planet's vast mineral wealth, of a partnership that would benefit both species. It had all been lies. Within 3 months, the human colonists found themselves enslaved. The Zelkari had weapons that made Earth's military hardware look like children's toys. Worse, they had technology that could control human minds directly, though they used it sparingly, preferring the psychological impact of traditional slavery to break their prisoners' spirits. Marcus had watched friends die in the mines, had seen strong men and women reduced to hollow shells of themselves. The Zelkari worked their human slaves 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, extracting rare minerals from the planet's core. The work was dangerous, the conditions brutal, and the aliens showed no mercy for weakness or injury. But Marcus had noticed something the others hadn't. The Zelkari, for all their advanced technology, had a fatal flaw: they underestimated humans. It wasn't surprising, really. Humans were shorter, weaker, and less technologically advanced than their captors. The Zelkari saw them as barely intelligent animals, useful for manual labor but incapable of complex thought or planning. This arrogance had created an opportunity, and Marcus intended to exploit it. The footsteps grew louder. Marcus took a deep breath and stepped out of the shadows. "Overseer Vexthal," he called out, his voice carefully pitched to sound defeated and submissive. The Zelkari guard turned, its dark eyes narrowing as it studied Marcus. Vexthal was smaller than most of its species, barely 7 feet tall, with the elaborate scarring on its forehead that marked it as a low-ranking overseer. It was responsible for the human slaves in Blocks 6 through 10, and Marcus had been carefully studying its routines for months. "Human designation 477, Vexthal said, its voice carrying the characteristic harmonic undertones of its species. "You should be in your assigned quarters. Explain your presence in this corridor." Marcus lowered his head in what he hoped looked like shame. "Forgive me, Overseer. I was hoping to speak with you privately." Vexthal's head tilted slightly, a gesture Marcus had learned indicated curiosity. The Zelkari were not used to humans taking initiative in conversation, and Marcus could see he had caught the alien's attention. "Speak," Vexthal commanded. "I have information," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. "About the other humans. About resistance activities." This was a complete lie, but Marcus knew it would appeal to Vexthal's paranoia. The Zelkari were constantly worried about human rebellion, even though most of the slaves were too broken or too scared to even consider fighting back. Any hint of organized resistance would be taken seriously. Vexthal stepped closer, its pale blue skin seeming to glow in the artificial light of the corridor. "What information?" I can't speak of it here," Marcus said, glancing around nervously. "The others might hear. If they knew I was talking to you." The alien considered this for a moment. Marcus held his breath, knowing that everything depended on Vexthal's next decision. "Come," the Zelkari said finally. "We will speak in my quarters." Marcus followed the alien through the winding corridors of the facility, his heart pounding with each step. Vexthal's quarters were in a restricted section of the complex, accessible only to Zelkari personnel. As they walked, Marcus memorized every detail of their route, noting security cameras, guard positions, and potential escape routes. Vexthal's quarters were larger than Marcus had expected, with a central living area furnished with the strange, organic-looking furniture the Zelkari preferred. Bioluminescent panels provided soft, blue-tinted light, and the air had the sweet, cloying scent that all Zelkari spaces seemed to carry. "Sit," Vexthal commanded, gesturing to a low bench near the center of the room. Marcus obeyed, but, as he sat, he positioned himself carefully. The bench was directly in front of Vexthal's personal workstation, a complex array of crystalline displays and control interfaces that the alien used to manage its slaves and coordinate with its superiors. More importantly, it was positioned between Marcus and the room's only exit. "Now," Vexthal said, settling into its own chair across from Marcus, "tell me of this resistance." Marcus had prepared for this moment. He began to weave a careful tale, mixing truth with fiction, describing imaginary meetings and non-existent plans. He spoke of humans gathering in secret, of weapons being hidden, of a planned uprising that would take place in 3 days' time. As he spoke, he watched Vexthal's reactions carefully. The alien leaned forward, its dark eyes growing wider with each detail. Marcus could see the excitement building in the creature's posture, the anticipation of being the one to uncover a major security threat. "These humans you speak of," Vexthal said when Marcus paused, "they meet in the old processing chamber in Block 12? "Yes," Marcus lied smoothly. "Tomorrow night, after the second shift ends." Vexthal stood abruptly and moved to its workstation. Its long fingers danced over the crystalline controls, bringing up displays that showed the facility's layout and security systems. Marcus watched carefully, memorizing the alien's access codes and the way it interacted with the technology. "This is valuable information, human," Vexthal said without turning around. "You will be rewarded. Perhaps better quarters, additional food rations." "Thank you, Overseer," Marcus said, standing slowly and moving closer to the workstation. "I only want to serve faithfully." Vexthal was completely absorbed in its work now, pulling up files on various human slaves and cross-referencing their locations with Marcus's fabricated intelligence. The alien's back was turned, its attention focused entirely on the displays before it. This was the moment Marcus had been planning for 6 months. In one swift motion, he grabbed a heavy crystalline paperweight from the workstation and brought it down hard on the back of Vexthal's skull. The alien collapsed without a sound, its tall form crumpling to the floor like a broken puppet. Marcus stood over the unconscious Zelkari, his heart racing. There was no going back now. In a few hours, when Vexthal failed to report in, the entire facility would be searching for the escaped human slave. But Marcus wasn't planning to escape. At least, not in the way his captors would expect. He dragged Vexthal's body to a storage closet in the back of the quarters, then returned to the workstation. The crystalline displays were still active, showing the facility's security grid and the locations of all human slaves. Marcus began to work. His engineering background served him well as he navigated the alien technology. The Zelkari systems were more advanced than anything humans had developed, but the underlying principles were similar enough that he could understand the basic functions. He began to upload a virus he'd been mentally composing for months, a piece of code designed to gradually corrupt the facility's databases while remaining undetected. But the virus was just the beginning. Marcus accessed the personnel files for every Zelkari in the facility, memorizing names, ranks, and responsibilities. He studied the shift rotations, the security protocols, and the communication systems. Most importantly, he located the facility's armory and identified the most vulnerable points in its defenses. As he worked, Marcus stripped Vexthal of its overseer uniform and put it on himself. The clothes were too large, designed for the Zelkari's taller, more slender frame, but, with some adjustments, they would serve his purpose. He found Vexthal's identification badge and access cards, clipping them to the uniform's chest. The most difficult part was yet to come. Marcus returned to the storage closet and looked down at the unconscious Zelkari. Vexthal was still breathing, its pale blue skin rising and falling slowly. Marcus had deliberately struck to stun rather than kill, because he needed the alien alive for what came next. He dragged Vexthal back to the main room and positioned the alien in its chair, using restraints from the storage closet to secure it in place. Then, he returned to the workstation and began the most dangerous part of his plan. The Zelkari had a strict hierarchy, and Vexthal's duties included regular communications with its superiors. Marcus accessed the communication logs and studied the patterns, learning the proper protocols and forms of address. Then, he composed a message to Vexthal's immediate supervisor, High Overseer Kelmoran. High Overseer, the message read, I have discovered significant intelligence regarding human resistance activities. The situation is more serious than initially believed. I am conducting a deep investigation and will be operating under communication silence for the next 72 hours to avoid detection. I will report my findings directly to you at the conclusion of this operation. Marcus sent the message and held his breath. If Kelmoran became suspicious and decided to investigate personally, the plan would fail before it truly began. But the Zelkari respected their hierarchy above all else, and lower-ranking overseers were often given considerable autonomy when dealing with security matters. The reply came within minutes, acknowledged. Proceed with caution, Overseer Vexthal. Marcus allowed himself a small smile. The first phase of his plan was complete. He spent the next several hours thoroughly studying the facility's systems and preparing for what would come next. He accessed the human slave databases, identifying individuals who might be useful allies, and began planning a series of subtle sabotage operations that would weaken the Zelkari's control without immediately revealing his involvement. As dawn broke over the alien landscape outside, Marcus made his final preparations. He positioned himself behind Vexthal's chair, staying within the shadows where the room's security cameras couldn't detect him clearly. To any observer, it would appear that Overseer Vexthal was conducting routine business at its workstation. But Marcus knew the truth. He was no longer a slave. For the first time in 6 years, he held power over his captors. And he intended to use that power to bring down the entire facility from within. Vexthal began to stir, its head rolling slightly as consciousness returned. Marcus pressed a blade against the alien's throat, a sharpened piece of metal he'd stolen from the mines months ago. Listen carefully, Marcus whispered in the alien's ear. You're going to do exactly as I say, or you're going to die. Do you understand? Vexthal's dark eyes widened in shock and fear. The alien had never imagined that a human slave could pose a threat, and the reality of its situation was only now beginning to sink in. I understand, Vexthal whispered, its harmonious voice now trembling with terror. Good, Marcus said. Because your cooperation is the only thing keeping you alive. And escape, for either of us, is no longer an option. Marcus pressed the blade slightly deeper, just enough to draw a thin line of blue blood. We're going to play a very careful game, you and I. You're going to continue your duties as overseer, but you're going to follow my instructions exactly. Any deviation, any attempt to signal for help, and you die. What do you want? Vexthal asked. Marcus smiled coldly. I want you to help me destroy this place from the inside out. I want you to help me free every human slave in this facility. And I want you to help me send a message to your people that humanity is not as helpless as they think. That's impossible, Vexthal stammered. The security systems, the other overseers, the garrison. Nothing is impossible, Marcus said firmly. You just need to think like a human. We're very good at finding ways to do impossible things. He loosened the restraints slightly, allowing Vexthal to move its arms but keeping the blade at its throat. Now, let's begin. You have a staff meeting in 2 hours. You're going to attend that meeting, and you're going to behave exactly as you normally would. But you're also going to gather information for me about guard rotations, weapon storage, and communication protocols. And if I refuse? Marcus pressed the blade deeper, drawing another drop of blue blood. Then, I kill you right now, take your uniform and identification, and try to do this the hard way. Your choice. Vexthal was silent for a long moment, clearly weighing its options. Finally, it spoke in a barely audible whisper. I will cooperate. Excellent, Marcus said. Because we have a lot of work to do, and very little time to do it. As the alien facility came to life around them, with guards changing shifts and slaves being marched to their daily labors, Marcus began to put his plan into motion. He had spent 6 years learning to think like his captors, studying their weaknesses and preparing for this moment. Now it was time to show the Zelkari what humans were truly capable of when pushed too far. The revolution had begun, and Marcus Chen intended to make sure it succeeded, even if it cost him everything. The first week of Marcus's deception passed without incident. Each morning, he positioned himself in the shadows behind Vexthal's chair, the blade never far from the alien's throat. The overseer attended meetings, filed reports, and carried out its normal duties while Marcus listened and learned. What he discovered was both encouraging and terrifying. The Zelkari facility was larger than he'd imagined, housing nearly 3,000 human slaves across 15 different blocks. The aliens themselves numbered only about 200, relying heavily on automated systems and their technological superiority to maintain control. This was good news for Marcus's plans, but it also meant that any uprising would need to be swift and decisive. The bad news was the weapons. Through Vexthal's access to security briefings, Marcus learned about the Zelkari's defensive capabilities. They possessed energy weapons that could kill dozens of humans in seconds, force fields that could seal off entire sections of the facility, and, most dangerously, neural disruptors that could incapacitate humans without permanent damage, allowing the aliens to recapture escaped slaves intact. But Marcus also discovered something the Zelkari didn't want their slaves to know: they were running out of time. The facility was one of dozens of operations the Zelkari had established across human space, but it was also one of the least profitable. The minerals they were extracting were valuable, but the costs of maintaining such a large slave population were enormous. Corporate headquarters on the Zelkari homeworld had given the facility 18 months to increase productivity by 40% or face closure. That deadline was only 6 weeks away. "Tell me about the neural disruptors," Marcus whispered to Vexthal during one of their private sessions. The alien's hands trembled as it accessed the relevant files. They are distributed throughout the facility. Each block has 4 units, positioned at strategic locations. They can be activated individually or all at once from the central security station. Marcus studied the schematics that appeared on the workstation. The neural disruptors were sophisticated pieces of technology, designed specifically to target human brain patterns. But, like all Zelkari equipment, they relied on crystalline control matrices that were vulnerable to the right kind of interference. What would happen if these control crystals were damaged? Marcus asked. The units would become inoperative, Vexthal admitted reluctantly. But human slaves do not have access to the restricted areas where they are stored. Marcus smiled coldly. But overseers do. Over the next few days, Marcus began to implement the second phase of his plan. Using Vexthal's access credentials, he started making subtle changes to the facility's systems. He altered work schedules to place specific humans in strategic locations. He modified security protocols to create brief windows of opportunity. Most importantly, he began to identify potential allies among the slave population. The process was delicate and dangerous. Marcus couldn't simply approach other humans and reveal his plan, as the Zelkari had informants among the slave population. Instead, he had to be subtle, leaving coded messages in work assignments and using Vexthal's authority to grant small privileges to individuals who showed signs of retaining their fighting spirit. His first real contact was with Sarah Martinez, a former military engineer who had been captured during the initial invasion. Marcus arranged for her to be assigned to maintenance duty in Block 7, which gave her access to the facility's technical systems. Clean the ventilation shafts in Corridor J7, Vexthal ordered her during a routine work assignment, reading from a script Marcus had prepared. Pay particular attention to Junction Box 447. Sarah's eyes flickered with understanding. Junction Box 447 was in a restricted area, and there was no logical reason for a slave to be sent there alone. But she nodded and went about her assigned task. Inside the junction box, she found a hand-drawn schematic of the facility's power grid and a note written in Marcus's handwriting: "Remember who you were before they broke you. The time is coming." Sarah stared at the note for a long moment, then carefully memorized the schematic before destroying both pieces of paper. When she returned to her quarters that night, her eyes held a spark that had been missing for years. Marcus repeated this process with a dozen other individuals over the following weeks. He identified Dr. James Reeves, a biochemist who had been working in the facility's medical bay. He located Tom Bradley, a former demolitions expert who had been relegated to waste disposal. Each contact was carefully planned and executed, building a network of potential allies without alerting the Zelkari security systems. But Marcus's most important discovery came during his third week of controlling Vexthal. While reviewing security footage, he noticed something odd about the facility's central command center. The Zelkari had assumed that their advanced technology was beyond human comprehension, but Marcus's engineering background allowed him to recognize what he was seeing. The entire facility's control systems were networked through a central processing core located in the command center's sub-basement. "That's impossible," he whispered as he studied the schematics. "They wouldn't centralize everything like that. It's a massive security risk." But, as he dug deeper into the technical documentation, he realized why the Zelkari had made this seemingly foolish design choice. Their technology was so advanced that they believed it was impossible for humans to understand or interfere with it. The centralized system was more efficient and easier to manage, and, from the Zelkari perspective, there was no risk because humans were simply too primitive to pose a threat. It was exactly the kind of arrogance that Marcus intended to exploit. "Access the central processing core protocols," he ordered Vexthal. The alien's hands shook as it complied. This is beyond my authorization level. If I access these files, it will be logged by security." "Then, we'd better make sure security doesn't have time to investigate," Marcus said grimly. The central processing core controlled everything: life support, security systems, communications, even the neural disruptors. If Marcus could gain access to it, he could potentially shut down the entire facility with a few keystrokes. But, getting to the sub-basement would require passing through multiple layers of security, and he would need help. It was time to accelerate his timeline. That night, Marcus implemented the third phase of his plan. Using Vexthal's authority, he called an emergency maintenance meeting for all human technical personnel. The meeting was scheduled for the old processing chamber in Block 12, the same location he had mentioned in his fabricated intelligence report. 23 humans attended the meeting, including Sarah Martinez, Dr. Reeves, and Tom Bradley. They gathered in the abandoned chamber, confused and nervous about being brought together outside of normal work hours. Marcus stepped out of the shadows, still wearing Vexthal's overseer uniform. "My name is Marcus Chen," he said quietly. "I was a mining engineer before they enslaved us. And I'm here to tell you that our captivity ends tonight." The reaction was immediate and intense. Some of the humans stepped back in fear, thinking he was a Zelkari collaborator. Others looked confused, unable to process what they were seeing. But a few, including Sarah and Tom, stepped forward with recognition in their eyes. "You're the one who's been leaving messages," Sarah said. Marcus nodded. "I've been preparing for this for months. I have control over Overseer Vexthal and access to the facility's systems. But I can't do this alone. I need your help." Dr. Reeves spoke up, his voice hoarse from years of silence. "What are you proposing?" "Complete liberation," Marcus said firmly. "We're going to take control of this facility, free every human slave, and send a message to the Zelkari that they picked the wrong species to enslave." "That's suicide," one of the other humans whispered. "They have weapons, force fields, those neural disruptor things. All of which are controlled by the central processing core in the command center," Marcus replied. "We take control of that, and we control everything." Tom Bradley's eyes lit up with understanding. "You want to hit them in their command structure. Cut the head off the snake." "Exactly," Marcus said. "But it won't be easy. We need to move simultaneously on multiple fronts. Some of us will need to disable the neural disruptors manually while others create distractions. A small team will need to infiltrate the command center and give me access to the central processing core." He looked around at the assembled humans, seeing fear and hope warring in their faces. "I won't lie to you. Some of us might not survive this. But if we succeed, we'll be free. All of us." Sarah stepped forward. "What do you need me to do?" Over the next hour, Marcus outlined his plan in detail. The timing would be critical, requiring coordination across the entire facility. They would need to move during the shift change, when security was temporarily reduced. The technical personnel would handle the neural disruptors while others created distractions to draw guards away from critical areas. "Remember," Marcus said as the meeting concluded, "the Zelkari think we're just animals. They don't believe humans are capable of complex planning or coordinated action. That arrogance is their weakness, and it's going to be their downfall." As the humans dispersed to prepare for the operation, Marcus returned to Vexthal's quarters. The alien was exactly where he had left it, secured in its chair with the blade still at its throat. "Your species made a mistake," Marcus said as he settled behind the chair. "You assumed that because you could defeat us with superior technology, that made you superior beings. But technology isn't intelligence, and strength isn't wisdom. What are you planning?" Vexthal whispered. "I'm planning to show you what humans are really capable of," Marcus replied. "You see, we've been studying you for 6 years. Learning your weaknesses, understanding your systems, preparing for this moment. And, tomorrow, your people are going to learn why enslaving humanity was the biggest mistake they ever made." Vexthal was silent for a long moment. "Even if you succeed in taking this facility, you cannot escape this planet. Our ships control the orbital space. Our home fleet will respond to any distress signal." Marcus smiled coldly. "Who said anything about escaping?" The next day passed with agonizing slowness. Marcus maintained his normal routine, keeping Vexthal on schedule and behaving exactly as a loyal overseer should. But, beneath the surface, 23 humans were making final preparations for an operation that would either liberate them all or get them killed. As evening approached and the shift change began, Marcus felt his heart rate increase. Everything he had worked for, everything he had planned, came down to the next few hours. "It's time," he whispered to Vexthal. The alien's eyes widened with terror as it realized what was about to happen. "Please, I have cooperated with you. I have done everything you asked." "Yes, you have," Marcus agreed. "And now you're going to help me with one final task." He moved the blade away from Vexthal's throat and began untying the restraints that held the alien in place. "You're going to walk with me to the command center. You're going to use your access credentials to get me inside. And then, you're going to help me take control of this entire facility." "I cannot," Vexthal protested. "If I do this, my own people will execute me for treason." Marcus looked down at the alien with cold eyes. "Your people should have thought of that before they decided to enslave mine." He pressed a small device into Vexthal's hand, a crude but effective explosive that Tom Bradley had constructed from mining equipment. "You have a choice. Help me willingly, and you might survive this. Refuse, and I detonate this device right here, killing us both and signaling the start of the operation anyway." Vexthal stared at the device in horror. "You would kill yourself just to hurt us?" "In a heartbeat," Marcus said without hesitation. "That's another thing your species never understood about humans. We don't just fight for victory. We fight for principles. And some principles are worth dying for." The alien looked into Marcus's eyes and saw the absolute conviction there. After a long moment, it slowly nodded. "I will help you." Marcus smiled grimly. "I knew you would. Now, let's go free my people." As they walked through the corridors toward the command center, Marcus could see the signs that his plan was already in motion. Lights flickered in certain sections, indicating that Sarah and her team were working on the neural disruptors. Distant alarms sounded from Block 15, where another team was creating a distraction by staging a fake accident in the mines. The Zelkari guards were responding exactly as Marcus had predicted, rushing to investigate the apparent emergencies while leaving other areas temporarily undefended. It was a textbook diversion, and the aliens were falling for it completely. "Your access code," Marcus whispered as they approached the command center entrance. Vexthal hesitated for just a moment, then pressed its hand against the scanner. The heavy doors slid open with a soft hiss, revealing the heart of the Zelkari operation. The command center was a vast chamber filled with holographic displays and control stations. A dozen Zelkari technicians worked at various consoles, monitoring the facility's operations and responding to the ongoing alarms. At the center of it all was the access terminal for the central processing core, protected by a force field and additional security measures. Overseer Vexthal, one of the technicians, called out as they entered. "We have reports of equipment failures in multiple sectors. Should we initiate lockdown protocols?" "Not yet," Vexthal replied, its voice carefully controlled. "I need to access the central processing core to determine if these failures are related to the core systems." The technician nodded and returned to its work, not noticing the small human figure that remained hidden behind Vexthal's tall frame. They approached the central terminal, and Marcus felt his heart pounding with anticipation. This was it. The moment that would determine whether his plan succeeded or failed catastrophically. "Lower the force field," he whispered to Vexthal. The alien's hand trembled as it entered its authorization code. The force field flickered and disappeared, leaving the terminal exposed. Marcus stepped forward and placed his hands on the crystalline interface. 6 years of studying Zelkari technology, 6 months of careful planning, and weeks of preparation had all led to this moment. The interface responded to his touch, and suddenly, Marcus found himself connected to the central nervous system of the entire facility. He could see everything: the location of every guard, the status of every system, the real-time feeds from every security camera. And, most importantly, he had control over all of it. With swift, precise movements, Marcus began to execute the final phase of his plan. He disabled the neural disruptors throughout the facility, sending a signal to his allies that it was safe to move openly. He sealed off the barracks where most of the Zelkari guards were stationed, trapping them inside with emergency lockdown protocols. Then, he opened every cell, every gate, and every door that kept humans confined. Throughout the facility, 3,000 human slaves suddenly found their prison doors standing open. The intercom system crackled to life, carrying Marcus's voice to every corner of the complex. "My fellow humans," he said, his voice strong and clear. "This is Marcus Chen. I was Slave 477, but I am a slave no longer. And neither are you." In Block 7, Sarah Martinez looked up from her work on the neural disruptor to see her cell door swing open. In the medical bay, Dr. Reeves watched in amazement as the force fields around the treatment areas deactivated. Throughout the facility, humans who had given up hope years ago suddenly found themselves free. 6 years ago, the Zelkari made a mistake, Marcus continued over the intercom. They thought they could break the human spirit. They thought they could reduce us to mindless labor. They were wrong. The command center erupted into chaos as Zelkari technicians realized what was happening. Several of them reached for weapons, but Marcus was ready for this. With a thought, he activated the chamber's internal security systems, filling the air with a paralyzing neural field that affected only Zelkari physiology. The aliens collapsed, unconscious but alive, leaving Marcus and Vexthal alone in the command center. "It's done," Marcus said quietly, looking at the displays that showed humans streaming out of their cells throughout the facility. "Your people's reign of terror ends today." Vexthal stared at the screens in shock. "This is impossible. How did you learn to interface with our technology?" Marcus smiled as he continued working at the terminal. "You want to know the secret? It's not about understanding your technology. It's about understanding the minds that created it." He gestured to the displays around them. "Your people designed all of this to be controlled by a hierarchical command structure because that's how Zelkari think. You assume that advanced technology requires advanced minds to operate it. But human engineering follows a different philosophy. We design our systems to be as simple and intuitive as possible." "I don't understand," Vexthal said. "Your species has become so dependent on complex technology that you've forgotten how to think simply," Marcus explained. "You've created systems so advanced that only your elite can understand them. But we humans learned long ago that the best solutions are often the simplest ones." He pulled up a schematic of the central processing core on the main display. This entire facility is controlled by one computer, connected to everything through a single network. It's incredibly efficient, but it's also incredibly vulnerable. One human with the right knowledge can take control of the entire system because your designers never imagined that anyone but a Zelkari elite would ever gain access to it. As Marcus spoke, reports began flooding in from throughout the facility. The humans had not simply escaped their cells, they were organizing, forming groups, and systematically taking control of their former prison. Years of suppressed anger and determination were finally being released, and the results were devastating for their captors. Your guards are trapped in their barracks, Marcus reported, watching the security feeds. Your weapons are locked in the armory, which my people now control. Your communication systems are offline, preventing you from calling for help. And, most importantly, your transport ships are grounded because I've taken control of the landing pad systems. Vexthal slumped in defeat. What will you do with us? Marcus considered this for a moment. That depends on your species' response to what happens next. He activated the facility's external communication array and began broadcasting a message to every Zelkari ship and station within range. This is Marcus Chen, speaking on behalf of the liberated humans of Kepler 442b, he said. We have taken control of your mining facility and freed all human slaves. We hold 200 Zelkari personnel as prisoners, and we have complete control of your technological assets. The response came within minutes, as expected. High Command was demanding immediate surrender, threatening orbital bombardment if the humans did not release their captives and return to their cells. Marcus smiled as he prepared his reply. The Zelkari were responding exactly as he had predicted they would, with threats and ultimatums. They still didn't understand what they were dealing with. You can bomb this facility, he transmitted back, but if you do, you'll kill your own people along with us. And, more importantly, you'll prove to every human in the galaxy that your promises of civilized treatment are lies. He paused for effect, knowing that his words were being recorded and would soon spread throughout Zelkari space. But, we have a better proposal. We're willing to negotiate a prisoner exchange. Your people for our freedom. All of it. Not just for the humans on this planet, but for every human slave in your empire. The silence that followed was telling. Marcus knew that the Zelkari leadership was frantically discussing their options, trying to find a way to maintain their authority while dealing with this unprecedented situation. Finally, a new voice came over the communication channel. It was older, more authoritative than the previous speakers. This is Fleet Admiral Zekthara of the Zelkari Imperial Navy. Who am I speaking with? Marcus Chen, as I said. Though I used to be known as Slave 477. You are not authorized to negotiate on behalf of your species. Marcus laughed, a sound that seemed to echo strangely through the alien command center. Neither were you when you decided to enslave us. But, here we are. What exactly are you proposing? Simple, Marcus said. You release every human slave in your empire. All of them. In return, we'll release your personnel and return your facility intact. You get your people back, and we get our freedom. Everyone goes home. That is unacceptable. Human slaves represent billions of credits in investment and labor value. Then, you've just learned an important lesson about the real cost of slavery, Marcus replied. Because the price of maintaining it just became higher than you can afford. Admiral Zekthara was silent for a long moment. And, if we refuse? Marcus looked around the command center, at the display showing his people taking control of their destiny, at Vexthal cowering in defeat beside him. Then, we make this very expensive for you, he said quietly. We have your technology now. We have your personnel. And, we have 3,000 very angry humans who have 6 years of suffering to pay back. He leaned closer to the microphone. But, more importantly, Admiral, we've proven something today that your species needs to understand: humans don't break as easily as you thought. And, once we're free, we have very good memories. The transmission ended, leaving the command center in silence. Marcus turned to Vexthal, who was staring at him with something approaching awe. Your species made 2 critical errors, Marcus said. First, you assumed that superior technology made you superior beings. Second, you forgot that the most dangerous human is the one with nothing left to lose. He gestured to the screens showing humans throughout the facility working together, organizing their newfound freedom with the efficiency and determination that had once built civilizations among the stars. Now your people have a choice to make. They can negotiate in good faith, or they can learn just how creative humans can be when it comes to making their enemies' lives difficult. Marcus Chen, former Slave 477, turned back to the command console and began preparing for the next phase of humanity's liberation. The revolution had succeeded beyond his wildest dreams, but the real test was yet to come. The Zelkari would have to decide whether their pride was worth more than their people's lives. And Marcus intended to make sure they chose wisely. The standoff lasted for 18 hours. During that time, the liberated humans of Kepler 442b transformed their former prison into something unprecedented in the galaxy, a fully functional, human-controlled facility that operated at 130% of its original efficiency. Marcus watched the transformation from the command center with a mixture of pride and amazement. Dr. Reeves had organized medical teams to treat the injured and malnourished. Sarah Martinez led engineering groups that improved the facility's systems using principles the Zelkari had never considered. Tom Bradley coordinated security teams that maintained order without the harsh punishments the aliens had relied upon. But, most remarkably, the humans had accomplished all of this while treating their Zelkari captives with a dignity that the aliens had never shown their slaves. "I don't understand," Vexthal said as it watched feeds from the detention areas where its fellow Zelkari were being held. "Your people are providing medical care to our injured. They are sharing food rations that they could keep for themselves. Why?" Marcus looked up from the communication console where he had been monitoring transmissions from the Zelkari fleet. "Because we're not you." "That is not an answer." "Yes, it is," Marcus replied firmly. "Your species enslaved us because you could. You treated us badly because it was efficient. You killed us when we became inconvenient because our lives had no value to you." He gestured to the screen showing humans caring for Zelkari prisoners. "We're treating your people well because that's who we are. Even after everything you've done to us, we won't become like you." Vexthal was quiet for a long moment, studying the displays with obvious confusion. "This is inefficient." "Maybe by your standards," Marcus agreed. "But efficiency isn't the only thing that matters. Sometimes doing the right thing is more important than doing the easy thing." The aliens seemed to struggle with this concept. "But, if your positions were reversed, we would not show such mercy." "I know," Marcus said quietly. "That's exactly the point." A new transmission came in from the Zelkari fleet, interrupting their conversation. Admiral Zekthara's voice filled the command center, carrying a tone of barely controlled fury. "Human, you have 1 hour to release our personnel and surrender control of the facility. If you do not comply, we will begin orbital bombardment." Marcus had been expecting this ultimatum. The Zelkari leadership had spent nearly a full day trying to find a military solution to their problem, and they had finally convinced themselves that destroying the facility was preferable to negotiating with escaped slaves. It was exactly the kind of short-sighted thinking that Marcus had been counting on. "Admiral," he replied calmly, "before you make any decisions you might regret, I suggest you review the data packet I'm transmitting to you now." He activated a program he had been preparing throughout the night, uploading terabytes of information directly to the Zelkari fleet's communication systems. The data included detailed schematics of the facility, recordings of the liberation, and, most importantly, a comprehensive analysis of what the humans had accomplished in less than 24 hours. The production reports alone were staggering. Under human control, the mining operations were running smoother than they had in years. The processing facilities were operating at peak efficiency. Even the administrative systems were functioning better now that humans had optimized them using principles of redundancy and fault tolerance that the Zelkari had never considered. But the most damaging information in the data packet was the financial analysis that Dr. Reeves had compiled. As a biochemist, he understood the economic principles behind resource extraction, and his calculations showed that the Zelkari had been operating their slave facilities at a massive loss. The cost of maintaining security forces, the inefficiency of unwilling labor, the constant need to replace slaves who died from overwork or despair, it all added up to an economic disaster that the Zelkari leadership had been hiding from their corporate superiors. "As you can see," Marcus said after giving the admiral time to review the data, we've improved every aspect of this operation in less than 1 day. Your people have been lying to you about the profitability of slave labor." The silence that followed stretched for several minutes. Marcus could imagine the frantic conversations taking place aboard the Zelkari ships as officers tried to verify the information he had provided. When Admiral Zekthara finally responded, his voice was much less confident than before. "These figures, they cannot be accurate." "They're completely accurate," Marcus replied. "Your own systems generated them. We simply analyzed the data honestly instead of manipulating it to hide the truth." He brought up a holographic display showing comparative efficiency charts. Human slaves working under threat of death produce about 60% of the output that free humans produce willingly. Factor in the costs of security, medical treatment for workplace injuries, and replacement of dead workers, and you're operating at a net loss of nearly 40%. Impossible. Check the numbers yourself, Marcus said. Better yet, ask your corporate leadership why they were planning to shut down this facility in 6 weeks due to poor performance. Another long silence followed. Marcus knew he had struck a nerve. Corporate decisions in Zelkari culture were closely guarded secrets, and the fact that he knew about the planned closure would force the fleet command to take his other information seriously. "What exactly are you proposing?" Admiral Zekthara finally asked. "A business transaction," Marcus said. "You get better productivity, lower operating costs, and higher profit margins. We get our freedom. It's a simple exchange that benefits everyone." "You speak of freedom, but you would still be working in our facilities." "No," Marcus corrected. "We would be working in our own facilities, under contract to your corporations. There's a significant difference." He activated another program, displaying a detailed proposal that he and the other former slaves had developed during the night. "We're offering to purchase this facility from your people at fair market value, using the increased profits as collateral. We'll continue mining operations, but as free contractors rather than slaves." The proposal was comprehensive, covering everything from labor negotiations to profit-sharing agreements. More importantly, it demonstrated a level of economic sophistication that the Zelkari had never credited humans with possessing. "Your people would work for us, voluntarily?" Admiral Zekthara asked, his confusion evident. "For fair compensation, reasonable working conditions, and the guarantee of personal freedom, yes," Marcus confirmed. "Humans are actually quite productive when we have something to work toward besides avoiding punishment." Vexthal leaned forward, studying the proposal with obvious interest. This would be acceptable to your people?" "More than acceptable," Marcus said. Dr. Reeves ran the calculations. Under this arrangement, the average human worker would earn enough to buy their own passage off-planet within 2 years. Those who chose to stay would become part owners of the operation within 5 years. "And your people would accept such a long timeline?" Marcus smiled. "Admiral, my people have been slaves for 6 years. 2 years of fair wages feels like freedom to us." He let that sink in for a moment before continuing. "But here's the part that should really interest your corporate leadership. This model could be replicated across every facility in your empire. Imagine increasing productivity by 40% while reducing operating costs by 30%, all by treating your workers as partners instead of property." The transmission ended, leaving the command center in tense silence. Marcus knew that the real negotiations were just beginning. The Zelkari Fleet Command would need to consult with their corporate superiors, and those discussions could take hours or even days. But Marcus wasn't worried about the delay. With each passing hour, his people were proving that they could not only maintain the facility's operations but improve them dramatically. The longer the negotiations took, the stronger the human position became. "You truly believe this will work?" Vexthal asked. "I know it will work," Marcus replied. "Because it's based on principles that humans have known for centuries. Free people work harder than slaves. Partners are more productive than prisoners. Cooperation achieves more than coercion." He turned to face the alien directly. "Your species forgot those principles when you became powerful enough to take what you wanted instead of earning it. But power without wisdom always leads to failure. Over the next several hours, Marcus continued to coordinate the facility's operations while monitoring communications from the Zelkari fleet. The messages became increasingly frequent as more senior officials became involved in the discussions. What Marcus found most encouraging was that the tone of the communications was changing. The initial threats and ultimatums had given way to serious questions about the proposal's feasibility. Corporate representatives were demanding detailed financial projections. Legal experts were debating the precedent that such an agreement would set. The Zelkari were actually considering his offer. The breakthrough came 36 hours after the initial liberation, when a new voice joined the communication channel. It was older and more authoritative than even Admiral Zekthera, carrying the weight of ultimate corporate power. This is Executive Prime Velkaner of the Zelkari Corporate Consortium. Am I speaking with the human who calls himself Marcus Chen? You are, Marcus replied, straightening in his chair. You have presented us with a most unusual situation. My analysts have reviewed your proposal and confirmed your productivity claims. The improvements your people have achieved in such a short time are impressive. Thank you, Executive Prime. However, the precedent this would set concerns my board of directors. If we negotiate with escaped slaves, it could encourage similar actions throughout our empire. Marcus had been prepared for this objection. With respect, Executive Prime, you're already dealing with similar actions. Your files show 17 separate incidents of slave unrest in the past year alone. The difference is that those incidents resulted in property damage and lost productivity. We're offering you a solution that increases profits instead. Explain. Marcus activated a new set of displays, showing economic projections that his team had spent hours developing. Every slave facility in your empire operates under the same inefficiencies we've identified here. Poor productivity, high security costs, constant replacement of workers. Convert just 10% of your operations to the partnership model, and your corporate profits would increase by over 2 billion credits annually. And the other 90%? Would see immediate improvements as word spread about the benefits of cooperation, Marcus said. You wouldn't need to force the transition. Market pressure would drive it naturally as facilities competed for the most productive workforce. Executive Prime Velkaner was silent for several minutes, presumably consulting with advisors and reviewing the projections. When he finally spoke again, his tone was carefully neutral. Your proposal has merit, but it raises questions of precedent and authority. By what right do you negotiate on behalf of all humans in our territory? Marcus smiled. This was the question he had been hoping for, because it gave him the opportunity to reveal the final element of his strategy. I don't claim to speak for all humans, Executive Prime. But I don't need to. He activated the facility's external communication array, connecting to networks across Zelkari space. Over the past 36 hours, my communications with your fleet have been broadcast across every frequency that human slaves have access to. Every facility in your empire now knows what we've accomplished here. The displays around the command center began showing incoming signals from dozens of different worlds and installations. Messages from human slaves who had heard about the liberation and were demanding similar negotiations with their own captors. Your choice isn't whether to accept our proposal, Marcus continued. Your choice is whether to accept it now, while you can still control the terms, or wait until every human facility in your empire is making the same demands. The response from Executive Prime Velkaner came surprisingly quickly. You are more cunning than our intelligence reports suggested. Your intelligence reports were compiled by people who saw us as animals, Marcus replied. Animals don't usually demonstrate cunning. Indeed. Very well, Mr. Chen. You have our attention. But understand that any agreement will require guarantees that your people will honor their commitments. Of course, Marcus said. And we'll expect the same from your people. The negotiations that followed were complex and occasionally heated, but they proceeded with a level of mutual respect that would have been impossible just days before. The Zelkari had been forced to acknowledge that humans were capable of sophisticated planning and execution, while the humans demonstrated that they could be reasonable partners when treated with dignity. The final agreement took 3 days to negotiate and another week to implement, but the results exceeded everyone's expectations. The Kepler 442b facility became the first human-operated mining colony in Zelkari space, with the former slaves becoming shareholders in their own liberation. Marcus found himself appointed as the facility's director, a role that felt surreal after years of slavery. But, perhaps even more satisfying was the message he received from Dr. Reeves on the morning the agreement was signed. Marcus, the biochemist said, finding him in what had once been Vexthal's quarters but was now Marcus's office, "You need to see this." He handed Marcus a data tablet showing communication intercepts from across Zelkari space. Reports were flooding in from dozens of facilities where human slaves had heard about the Kepler 442b agreement and were organizing their own liberation movements. "It's spreading faster than we expected," Dr. Reeves said. "The Zelkari corporate leadership is in panic mode. They're trying to negotiate preemptive agreements with human populations before they have to deal with more uprisings." Marcus smiled as he read the reports. "Good. The more facilities that convert to the partnership model, the stronger the precedent becomes." "Do you think it will work everywhere?" "It will work wherever people are willing to fight for it," Marcus replied. "The most important thing we've proven is that humans don't have to accept slavery just because someone else is stronger. We can find other ways to win." A chime from his communication console interrupted their conversation. Marcus activated the display and was surprised to see Vexthal's face appear on the screen. The former overseer had been released along with the other Zelkari prisoners and had chosen to return to the homeworld rather than stay on Kepler 442b. But it had requested permission to maintain contact, claiming it wanted to study the human partnership model for possible implementation elsewhere. "Director Chen," Vexthal said, using the title with obvious difficulty, "I wanted to inform you that I have been reassigned to oversee the transition of 3 more facilities to the partnership model." "That's excellent news," Marcus said genuinely. "How are your superiors adjusting to the new paradigm?" "With considerable difficulty," Vexthal admitted. "Many of my people still do not understand why humans work harder when treated well than when threatened with punishment." "Understanding isn't always necessary," Marcus replied. "Sometimes it's enough to accept that something works, even if you don't know why." "Perhaps. But I find myself curious about human motivations. Your people accomplished something my species believed impossible, and they did it through cooperation rather than domination." Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying the alien's expression. "What are you really asking, Vexthal?" "I am asking if you would be willing to serve as a consultant for the other transitions. My superiors believe that your insights could help prevent the conflicts and delays that have occurred at other facilities." It was an intriguing offer. Marcus had been focusing on establishing the Kepler 442b operation, but the idea of helping to liberate other humans across the galaxy was appealing. "I'd be willing to discuss it," he said finally. "But any consulting arrangement would need to include guarantees that the transitions would be genuine partnerships, not just cosmetic changes to maintain control." "Of course. My people have learned that superficial modifications are insufficient. The humans at other facilities have proven as resourceful as those here when they believe they are being deceived." Marcus smiled at that. The liberation of Kepler 442b had indeed started something much larger than he had originally planned. Across Zelkari space, humans were refusing to accept their status as slaves and demanding the dignity that should have been theirs from the beginning. But, perhaps even more importantly, some members of the Zelkari species were beginning to question the assumptions their society had built its power upon. Individuals like Vexthal were starting to understand that true strength came from cooperation rather than domination. "Send me the details," Marcus told the alien. "I'll review the situations and let you know where I think I can help." "Thank you, Director Chen. I believe our species have much to learn from each other." As the transmission ended, Marcus turned to Dr. Reeves. "What do you think? Is it worth the risk?" "Marcus, you positioned yourself behind an alien overseer with nothing but a sharp piece of metal and a plan that could have gotten you killed 100 different ways. And you used that position to free 3,000 people and fundamentally change the power structure of an entire galactic empire." Dr. Reeves smiled. "I think at this point, we can handle whatever risks come next." Marcus nodded and looked out the window at the alien landscape that had once been his prison. In the distance, he could see humans and Zelkari working together at the mining operations, a sight that would have been impossible just weeks before. The revolution had succeeded beyond his wildest dreams, but Marcus knew it was just the beginning. Across the galaxy, other humans were fighting for their freedom using the example he had set. And, slowly, gradually, the balance of power was shifting towards something more just. He had positioned himself behind his alien captor when escape was no longer an option. But, in the end, he hadn't needed to escape. He had found something better, the power to change everything. Years later, when historians wrote about the end of Zelkari slavery and the beginning of the Human-Zelkari Partnership Accords, they would mark the liberation of Kepler 442b as the turning point. They would study Marcus Chen's strategic thinking, analyze the economic principles that made the partnership model successful, and debate the long-term implications of the precedent he had established. But Marcus himself preferred to think about the simpler truth that had made it all possible: humans didn't break as easily as their captors had believed. And, once free, they had very good memories indeed. The galaxy would never be the same. And that was exactly as it should be. In the end, the greatest victory wasn't the liberation itself, but the proof that cooperation could achieve what domination never could. The Zelkari had learned to see humans as partners rather than property. Humans had learned that their strength lay not in matching their oppressors' cruelty, but in refusing to abandon their principles even under the worst circumstances. And, somewhere in the vast expanse of space, other species were beginning to take notice of what these two unlikely allies had accomplished together. The age of slavery was ending. The age of partnership had begun. And it had all started with one human who refused to accept that escape was impossible, even when positioned behind his alien captor with nowhere left to run.